Hey again, and welcome back to the channel. I'm the Kelon Guy, bringing you another Altered trading card game video, this time with some gameplay replay footage and tournament content. In today's video, I'm teaching you all the Waru secrets that experts don't want you to know, via some competitive tournament content. Will I win my first trophy for an Altered online tournament? You're about to find out. This one should hopefully be a bit more exciting than last time's metagame discussion video, but considering that it seems that you all loved that one, I'll definitely plan to do further metagame and theory discussions in the future. Settle in though, because this is a long one. There will be a giveaway though, in case that keeps you listening in. Now, I know I said that my next video would be for a deck that I was working on to crush the Waru menace, and that video will most certainly still be happening, as I've had some hilarious games, but this past Tuesday night, I randomly happened to pop into a single elimination tournament that was just starting when I couldn't sleep because I was too busy thinking about whether it matters which expedition Waru is supposed to sleep characters on when their opponents have the first move. And yes, this is a true story. Forget counting sheep, I'm counting as sleep markers and getting distracted. In any case, before long, I had somehow found myself in the finals against Pluka, whose Waru deck lists I had featured in my previous video as a current leader of the metagame given his tournament success, and it was a Waru versus Waru mirror match. Here's how that one went down. Game: Altered Corner Events Tuesday Championship Series Week 2 Finals. So we start off looking at a solid Waru hand with various bureaucrats in the turn 2 Robin Hood Classic. In this case, I decide to get rid of Isatok, the Council, and Ozma, favoring this early Thoth asleep into Robin Hood asleep curve, and keeping a teamwork training to hopefully snipe an important sleeping bureaucrat of my opponents at a bad timing for him. Pluka leads off with a Bountiful Meadow, a card that's being cut more and more frequently in favor of low-cost aggressive characters, and I'm immediately left wondering what expensive bureaucrat surprises will be in store for me. I'm thinking I may have to eventually play around an Isatok or two, maybe something else. I sleep my Thoth on my turn, and Pluka deploys his own sleeping bureaucrat, but so far, I'm very happy with the state of things. Starting off my next turn, I decide to mana an Ozma, as my plan this game is currently constructed around the idea of simply keeping my upcoming Robin Hood around for the rest of eternity. Then, I immediately make what turns out to be a massive mistake. So, I deploy my Noontime Ortis Recruit token onto the right side of the board, which allows my opponent to block my hero expedition with his own Noontime token. The reasoning that I had been thinking here was that my opponent had already shown me the Frog Prince at common, being a 3/0/3, which if he had a second one, he would be able to advance on the companion side via playing it, and if he had had a Quetzalcoatl at rare in hand at 3/3/3, it would perfectly outstat my Thoth at 3/3/2, and thus block me and advance. And if I had put the token on my hero side and my opponent played his token companion side, a rare Ortis Trooper could have taken a solid trade on the companion expedition as well. But this was a terrible mistake from me. Playing the Ortis Recruit on hero side would have made it very hard for my opponent to prevent my progression on both sides, given that I was about to slam Robin Hood, and if any of these lines of play that I had been worrying about had happened, my opponent would be down both in terms of cards, but I would also be compensated for not advancing in companion side via the token that Thoth generates. Ugh, that's what I get for playing Altered in the wee hours of the morning. I deploy out my Robin Hood, and my opponent, though, leverages his Bountiful Meadow to play out his own Robin through my Robin tax. I'm still feeling good about my chances as I am a card up, luckily, and we trade expeditions. Next, I find myself manaing that teamwork training that I chose to keep in my opener, which I've come to feel was also likely a mistake given how an ideal curve in this matchup looks, and how poor the card teamwork training feels into an opposing Robin Hood. We mirror each other at noon, and then Pluka shows off his trump card for the matchup. A unique Quetzalcoatl set up to casually draw 6 cards over 2 turns. Uh-oh. I quickly have to find a game plan much better than simply matching what my opponent is doing. So I choose to fire off a Sandman to keep my Robin around an extra turn without me having to invest more into it. So again, we trade expeditions. And I find myself putting into mana yet another Ozma, as that card feels particularly unplayable into this Quetz that will end up making 2 cards per draw of mine. In a different trading card game, this Quetz might have been on its own entirely game ending, but I feel like I can quickly put together a solid plan here. My strategy is that I need to cheese out expeditions and try to prevent my opponent from playing all of those cards that he's going to be drawing via this Quetzalcoatl. And this Robin Hood of mine absolutely helps me prevent him from playing out all those cards. So I eat his Robin quickly with a Sabotage, but Luca has the sticky note seals to start breaking this game plan of mine down pretty much from the second that I create it. I concede the Hero Expedition and play a Sleeping Thoth, and Pluka ends up sleeping a Bureaucrat of his own in this Ortus Attorney that he ends up playing on the companion side. At this point, the gameplay becomes pretty simple from my perspective. I need to cheese expedition wins at any cost. My opponent ends up leading here on a Sleeping Thoth. It is a unique Thoth, so this one aims to be able to discard permanents that are large, I guess, that are in play. And when it leaves the expedition zone, it draws a card. In this case, it's pretty irrelevant into the matchup that I'm playing, as I'm not playing any permanents that he could discard with it. In this case, it just represents an extra card draw, and as we've already seen from that Quetzalcoatl, he has plenty of that. So in this case, I'm very happy with him playing out a character like this to start his turn. So I decide to lead out on my own Robin Hood from reserve and put it to sleep. But Pluka has yet again the sticky note seals to get rid of it entirely. But this time I'm very okay with that, as it lets me find a double advance with Ortus Trooper in hand, and I still have a Bureaucrat sticking around in this Ortus Attorney. And here's that point where that early misplay versus his Frog Prince really is starting to come back to bite me. If I had done that one better, I likely would have my hero and companion right next to each other, instead of needing a double advance in order to win the game here. So drawing my next 2 cards, I decide to bin my own removal spell, given that I'm just looking to overload the board and try to cheese a win, especially with the Sandman unique here. The Sandman representing an ability for just 2 mana from hand in order to sleep a character. So I start aggressively playing out my cards, starting with a Sandman from reserve, then Ortus Trooper. Pluka's matching things pretty well. Play out the Thoth from hand. With just 2 mana left, Pluka decides to play a Teamwork Training, and impressively finds my Sandman from the hero side, which is a very heads-up play that really does aim to punish, cards like pretty much exactly what I'm holding in hand. Things that he wouldn't really be likely to expect if he was a lesser player, but in this case, it truly does prevent me from taking anything in this round, because I can see that he has this Ortus Attorney in reserve already. Like, his cards are all out in the open, and so I can't really find an expedition win this turn. So I do a lot of math and end up deciding that I have to concede the turn. Plays out his own Ortus Trooper unique. In this case, it doesn't matter too much what the actual text of it does, but it is this very strong unique, allowing him to continue to produce more tokens. and he's able to lock down at least one of the expeditions. He doesn't progress on the companion side, but that's still totally fine, because I've well and truly at this point gotten rid of pretty much the entire hand that I was working with. It's what a truly like a beautiful way to turn the corner for him, given how many cards that he's seen. All he really had to do is make sure that he could match me, and he can now leverage this amazing amount of cards that he's drawn. And considering that he's seen that many cards, it's finally time for him to find his second Robin Hood. And that one's very much going to lock up the game for him as soon as he plays it here, because I just won't be able to put enough onto the board in order to take that double advance that I need to win the game at any point here, and I am out of resources. I get rid of that unique Ortis Trooper from his reserve, plays out an Ozma, and I'm just stuck at this point, playing things sleeping, hoping that it would be able to do something the next turn, but he just has too many things in play, and too many things left over in hand. A well-timed teamwork training ends up removing my sleeping Ortis Attorney as well. It's truly a brutal situation here, and there's really nothing I can do to prevent anything. So he takes his double advance, and then the next turn is going to be very trivial for him to set up a double advance yet again, or just, a single advance, which also locks it up perfectly fine for him here. So I end up just playing out some dudes onto the companion side, but there's very little I can do to deal with this, both from the tax and just the overall quality and quantity of hand cards that Pluka still has remaining. Wow. I was surprised just how much of a chance I felt like I had in this game, given that Pluka is not only a tournament-winning Waru pilot, but the first player on BoardGameArena to break 2,000 arena points. I spent some hours going through this replay again and again until I felt as though I had identified my key mistakes, mostly being on that one early turn with the terrible Ortis recruit placement, but also noticing just how clean my opponent's play was, nimbly navigating all of the traps that I was laying out for him, and being very patient overall. I found out quickly, though, that luckily this second place finish had apparently qualified me for a championship event in a couple weeks, so I absolutely still felt like a winner. This single elimination event was the Altered Corner Events Tuesday Championship Series, which I very much enjoyed as yet another free competitive event that I could participate in. I'll link that Discord server below, but if that link breaks, just ask around in other Altered Discord servers so you can join in as well. Knowing that I intended to participate the next night as well in the Altered Weekly Online League Week 2 event, I decided to get a solid rest, and then started plotting some Waru strategy for my deck list specifically. Try to pay attention, as I'll ask a question later in the video for a prize giveaway, where you will have an advantage if you understand what my deck is aiming to do. So, I'm playing this aggressive Waru configuration featuring a full suite of 6 rare Ortis 1-mana plays between the Frog Prince and Ortis Trooper. In order to facilitate these rares, but also the cheaper Ortis Attorney rare as a 3 of, and then the classic 3 Quetzalcoatl and 3 Robin Hood for a total of 15 rares, I simply don't have the slots for the rare Sandman that plays so well with the Bureaucrats deck, which lets you put back to sleep your own Bureaucrats when you can tell that they're going to end up getting outstatted on one side, or being able to sleep opponents' characters at critical moments to snag progressions. But luckily, I've been able to configure my deck with 2 uniques that can put guys to sleep, and are reasonably synergistic with the deck to replace those rare copies of the Sandman. And then I have 1 crazy token generator plus card redraw unique in this awesome Foundry mechanic. With that, the 3 main strategies of the deck as such are follows. 1. Deploy Robin Hood sleeping with characters already in play, and then leverage the mana advantage this generates on subsequent turns to take double advances that the opponent cannot contest efficiently. Winning the game on a double advance late into the game is relatively trivial when your, say, 9 mana is a virtual 6 mana for them if they want to play 3 guys into your Robin Hood tax, or if they have to spend 4 mana to remove Robin Hood just to start off their turn. 2. Steal expedition wins on one side, while sleeping cost-effective bureaucrats to generate tempo advantage for subsequent turns. Counter opponent's ideal game plan with removal and sabotage effects. This is the foil strategy, and Waru does a great job of it due to the incidental card draw that the deck gets from cards like Ortis Attorney, and how you simply will have more resources over an average game, as your bureaucrats just get so much extra use from just one card due to their being asleep nearly half the time. 3. Spam overstated characters for their costs, and leverage token generation in order to overwhelm the opponent's board state. This isn't to say that other Waru strategies aren't viable as well, this is purely what my deck list was aiming to be optimized for. Where possible, this deck wants to do these 3 things from the top down, prioritizing those play around Robin Hood draws, given how impossible certain Robin Hood draws can be for opponents to contest. And with my strategy set up, I went into the AWOL weekly with the goal of playing clean and relying on this preparation. Let's check out a couple games from this event. So, starting with our 1-0 bracket versus Trace. As a Trace player myself, I know this matchup well, but from the other side, and it's a tough one for Trace. Especially the card Monolith Legate, like this one in my opener, does a great job of slowing down the Axiom Kelon machine. I throw away Sticky Note, as it doesn't hit much of anything that he could play, Charge, and Isatok, as those are both late game tools. He opens, and I trade with Trooper, and set up a Sleeping Legate, which is already an excellent start for me. I'm able to get rid of the Semilia that he played out, which prevents Trace from getting counters via playing it from reserve in a later turn. I then pick up a Robin Hood into my hand, which is simply massive. If my opponent has removal, I win both expeditions, levering this Ortus Recruit token that I get at noon. And if he doesn't, I still likely win on at least one side and have Robin sticking around. And that's exactly what happens. They play my favorite card to take one side, and they bin a Stargazer, which does set up some decent turn possibilities for him starting next turn. But as of yet, Traced is still at 0 counters and has no Haven in play, and we're feeling great. We put our Ortus Recruit on the hero side to threaten the progression on both sides. And they start off their turn by replaying the Kelon Elemental. And I decided to bite the bullet on giving Traced a counter to get rid of that Stargazer, simply because they hadn't managed to get any counters on Traced yet thus far. I do make a misplay here in choosing what to do at this point, playing this Legate out, sleeping from reserve. And I do believe in retrospect that I should have deployed the Trooper from reserve in order to take the left expedition, and then slept the Frog Prince on the companion side, which absolutely would have met the first criteria of the gameplay strategy that I was laying out, much better than meeting the second criteria via trading here, or not advancing on the left. But regardless, this is still a great situation for me to be in. Now, next turn, we're ready to redeploy Robin, and start cooking with our 1-mana plays left over. Our opponent does have a solid play here, though, of another Kelon Elemental putting a rare Ada into reserve, which does threaten to put some counters onto their Traced. But the fact that there's no immediate removal for Robin is reassuring, as Traced ability ends up feeling a lot worse under this Robin threat as well. So we sleep another Frog Prince at the end of the turn here, in order to continue to trade and to threaten both sides with Robin out. And while I'm still 1 expedition up, despite all the things that he managed to play out this turn. So we draw our next 2, and this time I think our hand is too good to get rid of anything here. No matter what, we'll only be able to play 2 cards this turn. And they're efficiently statted dudes that come with card draw, and I can't complain about that. I want to see what our opponent leads on before making the decision of what card we end up choosing to play first, and deciding our gameplay strategy based on that. So, our opponent, though, in this case, does lead on this Kelon Elemental, with the intention of activating the Traced ability now, with it reaching 5 counters. However, I do notice they're currently only matching stats on the left, and we're feeling really good. I do decide to play out here our unique in this foundry mechanic. It's a token generator that comes with a redraw at the end of the day, which threatens to either push to take the win on both sides, or to sleep our Robin Hood once again if they end up still choosing to deploy to that hero side. So here they do activate the trace ability, and they show us a Kelon burst, which I'm expecting them to fire off pretty much immediately, but instead they choose to cast a Hooked, which ends up moving our Robin over to the companion side. How interesting. The fact that my opponent chose to lead on Hooked to move my Robin to the other side, instead of playing the Kelon burst in order to get rid of the Robin entirely, tells me a couple things. One, I might have to play around another 1 mana play from their hand, and 2, they don't think that I'm going to be able to put this Robin asleep, which honestly makes me feel even better about the idea of simply trying to sleep it. And then I end up having to choose where I want to be winning expeditions here if they do have that 1 mana play. So I choose to put the Robin asleep and sacrifice the Frog Prince to the effect that allows me to put the Robin to sleep, on the basis that if my opponent does choose to play a 1 mana play on that side, I'm okay with that. I would end up progressing on the hero side, and then for what I hope to be the final turn, I would be on a water forest tile, and a mountain forest tile as the companion side, which is definitely better than the mountain only tile and the water only tile that I would be on if they found a way to play something onto the hero side. In this specific instance, I decide that's the way to go, and I decide to sleep the Robin on the other side, with the thinking that if they do have that 1 mana play here, they would play it onto the hero side, and neither of us would progress, but that's still a totally fine position for me to be in. They end up not playing a 1 mana play, and I'm a little confused about the fact that they chose to cast Hooked in that case instead of the removal, but I'm happy to be putting my Robin Hood to sleep, and I'm still working with a lot of gas for the next turn. And then from here, with a Robin Hood already in play and 7 mana available, it's relatively trivial to take the double advance against an opponent who needs to play many mana down in order to have a shot. And so I just simply threaten to make many small dudes, which happens to work really well against my opponent's strategy of hopefully being able to leverage Hooked to prevent the double advance. But in this case, I just have too many cheap guys. They do get a good interaction off of the trace ability of being able to resupply an Amelia, but it's not enough. My opponent ends up looking down the barrel of just so many 1/1 tokens that I can generate, hook something to the other side, but it's not enough. Next up, we're against Teja in the 3-0 bracket match. We start off with yet another strong hand, keeping our token generation unique, a Robin Hood, and a Quetzalcoatl. Getting rid of sticky note seals is always a strange gamble versus Muna. If they do find a way to deploy an early Hydrocana, and you don't find another copy of sticky note seals, you can simply get crushed. But Sticky Note operates just so poorly versus an Avroteja early game that I would rather have the maximum ability to fight early if needed, so away it goes. We lead out on a sleeping Quetzalcoatl, which doesn't feel wonderful into a Teja opener that could easily have a double advance opening, but the Teja play is blissfully an Aloe Vera that can't even get anchored. We're so beyond cool with this. If Waru opens up with a sleeper and doesn't get punished with removal or a double advance, things just feel so good for the deck. We opt this next turn to put one recruit on hero side to force a play there, and then our other recruit goes to the companion side to outstat a potential Aloe Vera on his expedition should he choose to play it there. Our opponent leads on Bountiful Meadow, seemingly intending on using it to replay his own Aloe Vera from reserve, And we hit our gotcha button by playing out our Robin Hood asleep, preventing them from playing out that aloe vera, and our opponent just has a Kodama to deploy back, which lets us double advance. This next turn, we opt to mana a Thoth, so that we can continue to rely on our cheaper plays and then curve out well. Our token producer, Mechanic, ends up leading out on Robin's side, which gets matched and outstatted by a very big Daughter of Yggdrasil, and things do get a little bit rougher resultingly. But my plan here is to deploy onto the hero side once more to advance and leverage our Sandman to keep our Robin Hood around for yet another turn of taxing. Our opponent deploys the Spindle Harvesters. And I'm starting to pick up some whispers in the wind. Our opponent has played Aloe Vera, which can gain Anchored, Spindle Harvester, which does the same, Kodama Common, which just goes to sleep when played from hand, and Daughter, which although massive, does come with the both players dig further into their decks effect. We're ahead and feeling good with Robin in play, but something's just tickling in the back of my mind, and I desperately want to find some form of removal to make that nagging feeling go away. This turn here with that Robin Hood that I've still managed to keep on play up until this point, I end up deciding to lead out after our opponent plays this Kodama from reserve by playing this Foundry mechanic yet again as well, threatening to continue to go really wide with the number of guys that we can generate, and our Ozma blissfully draws us into a Sticky Note Seals, and suddenly I'm feeling much more comfortable that at least I have an emergency plan. I don't want to give my opponent much time for any strategy of theirs to develop, so I decide to full send here to try to take the double progression and start threatening the win, being just one expedition in between our hero and companion, so a double advance would win it for us. But that does absolutely overflow our reserve. We do have to discard down, and we won't have anything left over here. We draw 2 more cards, and with 1 critical removal in hand, I feel comfortable getting rid of the other, and decide that I can take it slow, and sleep Robin. If our opponent does have Hydrocana, well, we have that perfectly covered with the Sticky Note. And the whispers in the wind are telling me yet again that if it's not Hydrocana, this Robin Hood's really good against whatever else our opponent might have planned. We end up deciding to sleep some card draw as well, to set up for hopefully a double advance turn the next turn. But our opponent does remove Robin Hood. Oh boy. Luckily, we still have a good bit of flexibility. Our opponent is pushing closer to an expedition win, but something is telling me that there's a party planned, maybe even a festival. And Sticky Note Seals should seal the deal as long as our opponent has to play a festival before we play our Sticky Note Seals, if that is their plan. Our opponent ends up leading out on Meditation Training as sort of an after you effect, and at that point, I'm sure we've won. We just have so many characters that we can deploy here, and Sandman to sleep an imposing character should certainly seal the deal. So our opponent ends up conceding and tells us afterwards that our Robin Hood absolutely ruined their Muna Festival strategy. This game is just a reminder that there are so many variables to think about when it comes to deck configuration, and ways that players can look for a win that you always have to be keeping in mind, especially as a Waru pilot. Now, skipping ahead a bit again in the tournament, look where we found ourselves. We find ourselves in the finals playing at 4 in the morning my time. Unfortunately, it's no Honor Battle rematch against Pluka and his Waru deck from the day before. He wrote me telling me that he had dropped around but was rooting for me to win, and we find our finals opponent to be an Aphanis pilot, who I understand has some scary uniques in their deck. We look at our opener and we're not at all thrilled. We have no easy to set up Robin Hood, we don't have any 1 mana play to go with our 2-cost dudes. I figure that considering that we're leading out, I'd rather have the best chance of drawing Robin early in the game, and something that plays ideally well against a potential Sneezer Shroom, so I lead on an Ortis Attorney, which I sleep, but I immediately get slapped with an Off You Go. Luckily, however, there isn't any 1-mana play from our opponent to take the lead, so all things considered, it's not good for us, but it's not critically bad either. Day 2, we end up picking up a Thoth, but we unfortunately watch our attorney get tragically sabotaged with this Tooth Fairy. But that does let us play out our Thoth instead of it just being vulnerable to this 4-cost from reserve removal in the Off You Go. We're hoping here that our opponent doesn't have a second Off You Go, which they luckily don't, and they instead play out a Hathor to take both sides. This isn't optimal, but I'm actually just thinking here about how lucky I am that wasn't a Sneezer Shroom setup instead of the Hathor. Our opponent here has overflowed their reserve, is down to just a single card in hand, and occasionally Ephanis draws can be a little bit anemic when it comes to dead draws or semi-alive draws against certain turns from the Waru deck. For example, the card Beauty Sleep, which would be able to put something to sleep, doesn't really do anything when there's only asleep bureaucrats in play. Our next draw, we're disappointed to find no Ortis Spy or Robin Hood, and no uniques either, but at least we have 2 cards to play for our turn. We set up a Sleeping Legate, and I'm expecting to see the Ephanis player deploy a Shroom, unique, or a Mage Dancer and threaten to pick up the Off You Go in reserve via Hathor's support ability. But our opponent ends up leading out on Hathor from reserve, and now I start to smell some blood in the water. If our opponent had a good Ephanis synergy character in hand to play, it would already be out, or Hathor would have already been used to pick up that Off You Go, or maybe even both. So I decide here to gamble on removing what I believe to be their only character, instead of deploying yet another sleeper in this Quetzalcoatl from hand. Firing off this teamwork training, and then watching our opponent start drawing cards feels very good. We take the initiative back from that early turn, and we move on to the next turn, where we yet again fail to find Robin or uniques to play. But I won't complain about Quetz, however. We end up getting sabotaged by yet another Tooth Fairy, which is really starting to crush us on the card advantage end. But we lead out on this Quetz, and they end up choosing to draw cards into it, which is really excellent for us, as it lets us match their Tooth Fairy on that side by simply playing the Ortis Recruit tokens that Quetzalcoatl generates onto that side as well. We've also given our opponent a very strange puzzle if they have cards like Beauty Sleep or a Helping Hand in their hand, where they don't really do much of anything. So we play out our second Quetzalcoatl sleeping onto this board state, which will really put the hurt on if they have any more card draw coming. But we're well and truly out of gas right now. Our opponent does play a Helping Hand, but as I mentioned, this is pretty great for us. They're again overflowing the reserve in a pretty major way, and there's multiple Quetzalcoatls on board, which is still a massive threat. We trade, and I'm again just sitting here praying for a Robin Hood draw. No such luck. Here, I decide that I can make it clear to my opponent how little gas I have by manaing the Sticky Note Seals, which at this point I don't believe has any targets in their deck outside of maybe Flamel, but it also does a good job of playing around a potential Off You Go from our opponent, as by manaing the Sticky Note Seals, it lets us play around a potential Off You Go from our opponent by simply letting us replay whatever gets sent to reserve. Our opponent ends up finding a Sneezer Shroom, finally, that they can start buffing up. But we don't mind much, because if they win that side without removing the Legate that I then choose to sleep there, we'll be able to continue removing critical resources from the reserve. They fire off this Helping Hand, just to add some counters onto this Sneezer Shroom. And they do play out a Hathor in order to win that side, which again, I'm totally fine about, as I will get to remove something here. But now I have a critical decision to make when it comes to whether I get rid of the Hathor or the Off You Go, and I end up leaning towards the Hathor, because if my opponent here ends up spending 4 mana for an Off You Go from reserve, I'm considering that a win. And otherwise, I really want to prevent them from potentially recycling another copy of Off You Go with that Hathor support ability, which would allow them to get many uses out of the single Off You Go. So we're truly running on fumes here, praying that we can keep snagging expeditions with whatever we have left. And our opponent ends up playing out a third Tooth Fairy to again remove a Quetzalcoatl from my reserve. It doesn't feel the best whatsoever, but at least we're glad to have a Legate on that side to get rid of something at dusk. And at this point, we need to gamble that our opponent doesn't have a fourth Sabotage effect beyond those 3 Tooth Fairies, because we need that Quetz in order to win. And as it stands, it looks like our opponent was prepping to off you go should we play that Quetzalcoatl out directly from reserve. So we leave it in reserve and we play the Trooper from our hand instead. That does force the off you go from their side, and we're absolutely thrilled. Now we're able to set up yet once again a Monolith Legate sleeping on their side to remove something of theirs. We're still set up well to take the companion side victory, and they end up passing, and so we're able to entirely deploy out just a bunch of sleepers, which is excellent for setting up the next turn. And it does put us into a position as well where if we're able to double advance, we'll be able to win the game. They're in a similar spot, however, and a deck like Aphanis can pump out the counters in order to win both sides in certain situations. But we're really thankful to have this Monolith Legate, allowing us to get rid of their Sneezer Shroom here at dusk. We draw our hand, and oh boy, we have lots of dudes in play. Let's make this charge do magic. Our opponent here plays out a Baba Yaga, which ends up giving us just another Trooper token in return thanks to the Quetz ability. We slam our own Attorney. No sleep. They play another Baba Yaga, and now I've never been more certain that charge will be lethal in my life. And with that, we take the match, winning the finals of AWOL Week 2 in the weirdest game of Altered that I think I've ever played, where neither deck functions properly. And we see none of our Robins, none of our Uniques. What a match. Our gameplay strategy, as we laid it out, worked great. Whenever we were trying to figure out how to handle our games, I love our unique configuration particularly, where we're trying to get maximum efficiency out of those rare slots by adding in redundant effects in replacement of rares as our uniques. Should something change as to Robin Hood's status as far as being a legal card and such is concerned, there would certainly be many adjustments that are needed for the deck, but as it stands, I'm loving the low curve that we're working with. So now, for those of you who are looking for the giveaway, I'm once again putting the deck list that I've been playing up on the screen. And here's how this works. There is one card that I intend to remove a copy of in the deck, as it doesn't really play as well with the gameplay strategy as I've laid it out earlier in the video. And I intend to replace it with a copy of another card, of course. So the first person to write in the comments with what card that they think I want to replace and gets it correct will win a rare foiler. If they also happen to correctly name the card that I want to add a copy of, I'll throw in a unique foiler as well. And then, the best guess and replacement suggestion that isn't correct will also receive a rare foiler. Here's an example of what a comment like that could look like. My guess is that you want to replace one copy of Rare Robin Hood with a copy of Foundry Mechanic, as it helps with strategies 2 and 3, helping you trade with opponents and helps you overwhelm their board. This is obviously a meme suggestion, because I won't be cutting Robin anytime soon, but there's an example. One guess entry only per person, sorry. And unfortunately, I've already spoiled the answer to Pluka via DM, so Pluka is unfortunately ineligible for the correct guess prize. If you want, you can still add in some thoughts for the, potential incorrect guess, if you also want to have a chance of winning a rare foiler, but sorry buddy. I'll wait a week or so before I choose my favorite wrong guess. Thanks for tuning in, and I promise next time I'll show you some beating up on Waru, not as Waru. Until then, may your openers have your best uniques and perfect turn 1 plays. I'm the Kelon Guy, signing off. Peace.